Morning of my 72nd birthday started the way most of my mornings did since my wife passed. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long while before standing, listening to the radiator clank in the corner of the bedroom that used to be ours. The light through the curtains was that pale blue you only get in late October in Pennsylvania. The kind that makes a man feel his age in his shoulders before he's even put his feet on the floor. I'd been awake since 4. I always am now. Downstairs I could hear movement. My son's voice, low and clipped, and a woman's laugh that wasn't quite a laugh, more like a noise she made to let everyone know she was in the room. That would be his fiancée. They'd been engaged 11 months. Though she'd been living in my house for almost 3 years, I went to the bathroom and ran the water until it got warm, which takes a while in this house. The plumbing was original to 1962 when my father built it. He laid the foundation himself with a cousin from Altoona who later went to prison for something nobody in the family ever talked about. My father gave me this house when he passed in '88. Said it was the only thing he had worth giving, and I should take care of it because a man without a roof is a man without a name. I shaved slowly. I looked at myself in the mirror and tried to find my father in my face. I could see him in the chin, maybe. The eyes were my mother's. The exhaustion was my own. I came downstairs in the gray cardigan my late wife knitted for me the winter before she got sick. It still smelled faintly of her, or I told myself it did. The kitchen was full of food I hadn't bought. My son was at the counter slicing tomatoes with my good knife, the one I'd told him 100 times to keep sharp because a dull knife is what cuts you. His fiancée was sitting at the breakfast bar scrolling on her phone, drinking from one of my late wife's china cups. The good china, the ones we use twice a year. There he is, my son said without looking up. Sleeping Beauty. His fiancée laughed her noise. Morning, I said. I went to the coffee pot. It was empty. I started a new one. We invited some people over for tonight, my son said. Few of my friends from work. Couple of Madison's people. Don't worry about it. We got it covered. Tonight, yeah, Saturday, your birthday. I hadn't told him. I never told him. He'd remembered on his own. Or his fiancée had reminded him. Or more likely, his sister had called from Tucson and said, "Don't forget Dad's 72nd. That's nice of you, I said. Mm-hmm. I poured my coffee black. I took it to the back porch and sat in my father's old chair and watched the leaves come down off the oak that was older than the house. I don't know what I was thinking about. Probably nothing. Probably my wife. I think about her a lot at certain hours of the day, especially at the hours when we used to do small things together, like coffee on the porch. My son's name was given to him by his mother. She picked it because it was her grandfather's name, and her grandfather had been the only man in her family who never raised his voice at her. She wanted that for our boy. A quiet name for a quiet man. Well, he hadn't turned out quiet, man. Well, he hadn't turned out quiet. He turned out angry. I don't know exactly when it happened or why. He was a sweet boy until he was about 15. Then something turned in him, the way milk turns. And afterwards, every conversation was a negotiation, and every kindness was a debt I owed him. By the time his mother got sick, he was already a stranger living in our house. He moved out at 23, came back at 31 when his marriage fell apart and never left. His fiancée came along about a year later. I won't say much about her. I don't believe in speaking ill of women, even the ones who deserve it. I'll just say this. From the first night she set foot in my house, she walked through the rooms the way a real estate agent walks through a listing, touching things, pricing them in her head, looking up at the ceiling like she was checking for water damage. That was 3 years ago. In that time, my son had not held a steady job for more than 4 months. His fiancée had never held one, I could verify. They drove a leased BMW that I co-signed because my son said he needed it for the new sales position, which lasted 6 weeks. I covered the lease payments. I covered their groceries because my son said they were saving up. I covered their phone bills because my son said his fiancée's mother had cancer and the family needed to stay in touch. There was no cancer. I learned that from a Christmas card the mother sent me, asking if I'd like to come to her 65th birthday party in Reading. I'd let it all happen. I want to be honest about that. I'd let it all happen because my wife, the last thing she said to me before the morphine took her under for good, was that I had to take care of our son, that I had to be patient with him, that he was hurt in ways I couldn't see, and someday he'd come back to himself and I had to be there when he did. I made a promise. A man keeps his promises, even when they ruin him. So I ate the cheap soup from the dented cans at the back of the discount shelf at the grocery store on Route 30. I bought day-old bread from the bakery outlet because it was half price after 4 p.m. I wore the same 3 sweaters my wife had knitted me, washed gentle, hung to dry. I let my son and his fiancée order takeout 4 nights a week on the credit card I'd given him for emergencies in 2019. I let them charge a weekend in Atlantic City because, my son said, it was for a job interview. I let them charge a ring. The ring on her finger. $3,400. On my visa. In March. I was not stupid. I want that on the record. I knew what was happening. I had a ledger in the top drawer of the desk in the den, and every charge that came through the statements got logged in it, in pencil, in my handwriting, which is the same handwriting I used to sign payroll for 16 men back when I ran my own electrical contracting business in the 70s and 80s. I wrote down everything. I knew exactly what they had taken from me. I just wasn't ready to do anything about it yet. I was waiting. I didn't know for what. I think now I was waiting for him to give me permission, somehow, to stop loving him. I needed him to do something I couldn't forgive, so I could finally rest. He gave it to me on the night of my 72nd birthday. The party started at 6. By 5:30, the house was already full of people I didn't know. Young people, mostly, my son's age or his fiancé's, dressed for a club rather than a dinner. There was music playing from a speaker on the dining room table. The dining room table where my wife and I had eaten Thanksgiving for 41 years. My fiancé's friends and I include the fiancé in this, were drinking from my wife's wine glasses and setting them down on the wood without coasters. I went around quietly putting coasters under each one. Nobody noticed. Nobody thanked me. There was a banner over the kitchen archway. It said, "Happy 73's, Dad," in green and yellow letters. They'd gotten the number wrong. I was 72. I told my son in August, when he asked if I needed any new shirts for my birthday, that it was my 72nd and not my 70th. And he laughed and said, "Sorry, old man, can't keep track. I didn't correct the banner. I didn't want to make a scene." Around 6:15, my son's older sister called me from Tucson. She said she was sorry she couldn't be there. She said she'd sent a card. She asked how I was, and I said fine, and she said, "Dad, are you really fine?" And I said, "Yes, sweetheart, I'm fine. You have a good night." I didn't tell her about the banner. I didn't tell her about the fiancé using the china cups for coffee. I never told my daughter anything because she had 3 kids and a husband on dialysis, and I was not going to be one more thing on her shoulders. Dinner was supposed to be at 7. By 7:15, everyone was sitting down except for me and my son and his fiancée, who were in the kitchen. I could hear them whispering. I could hear his fiancée laughing that noise of hers. I went into the den to wait. I sat in my father's chair, the one I dragged in from the porch when the weather turned, and I looked at the wedding photo of my wife and me on the wall. 1971. She was 22. I was 25. We didn't have a dime. We were the happiest 2 people in Pennsylvania. My son came to the door of the den. He had something in his hands, a bowl, white ceramic, not from the kitchen. "Dad," he said, "come on, we're ready for you." I got up. I followed him into the dining room. The table was full, 22 people, I counted later, because I made myself count, because I needed to remember it exactly. My son's fiancée was at the head of the table, in my late wife's chair, the chair my wife had picked out at an estate sale in 1979 and refinished herself in the garage over the course of a summer. His fiancée was sitting in it holding her phone up recording. My son walked me to the seat at the foot of the table. the one he'd always called the dad seat when he was a boy. He pulled the chair out for me, made a show of it. Everyone was watching. "Sit down, old man," he said. "Got something special for you." I sat. There was no plate in front of me. Just a placemat. He set the white ceramic bowl down on the placemat. It was full of something brown and lumpy, wet-looking. The smell hit me a second later. It was dog food, the kind I'd seen in the pantry for the dog his fiancée had brought into the house last year, a small, angry dog that had bit me twice on the ankle and once on the wrist. The room had gone quiet. My son stepped back from the table. He had a smile on his face I had never seen before. Not on him. Not on any man I'd ever known. It was the smile of a person who has decided he is finally going to say the thing. "This is what freeloaders eat, old man," he said. He said it loud. He said it for the whole table. His fiancée behind her phone made her laughing noise. Two of his friends, sitting near him, laughed too, but the laughs trailed off when they realized nobody else was laughing. A woman across the table, somebody's wife or girlfriend whose name I never learned, put her hand over her mouth. The man next to her, an older fellow, maybe 55, with the kind of face that has seen things, set his fork down very slowly and looked at me. I looked at the bowl. I'm going to tell you what went through my head. I think a lot of men would say their life flashed before them, or they got angry, or they cried. None of that happened to me. What happened was, I thought of my wife. I thought of her in the hospital bed, 3 days before she died, holding my hand and telling me to take care of our boy. I thought of the promise I'd made, and I felt, for the first time in 17 years, that promise lift off my shoulders. She wouldn't have wanted this. I knew that the way I knew my own name, my wife was the gentlest woman who ever lived, and she would have walked across that dining room and slapped our son so hard his teeth would have rattled, and then she would have told him to leave her house and never come back. She would have done it for me, because I couldn't. I was free. I stood up. I didn't say anything. I didn't make a speech. I picked up the bowl of dog food and I walked it back into the kitchen and I set it down on the counter next to the sink. I rinsed my hands. I dried them on the dish towel my wife had embroidered with little blue flowers the year before she got sick. I went upstairs. In the bedroom, I took down my old leather suitcase from the top of the closet. My father gave me that suitcase when I went into the army in 1971. I packed 3 pairs of pants, 4 shirts, my cardigans, my razor, my pills, and the small framed photograph of my wife that I keep on the nightstand. I packed a ledger from the top drawer of the desk in the den. I packed my checkbook. I packed the deed to the house, which was in a fire safe under the bed, in a folder my wife had labeled important in her round teacher's handwriting. It took me 20 minutes. I could hear the party still going downstairs. The music had started up again. Someone had decided, I guess, that the awkward moment had passed. I went down the back stairs, the ones that come out near the mudroom. I put on my coat. I took my keys off the hook. I went out the back door and got into my truck, the 2004 Ford F-150 I'd bought, used from a man in Lancaster, and I backed down the driveway slow because the gravel was loose. I drove to the Hampton Inn up by the interstate. I paid cash for 2 nights. The girl at the desk asked me if I was all right, and I said, "Yes, ma'am, just tired," and she gave me extra little bottles of shampoo, even though I hadn't asked for them. People are kinder than you think. Most of them. I sat on the bed in that hotel room for a long time without turning on the TV. Around midnight, my phone started ringing. It was my son. I let it ring out. 20 minutes later, he called again. Then his fiancée called from her own number. Then him again. I turned the phone off. I slept 8 hours straight, the first time since my wife died. The next morning, Sunday, I got up at 6. I had coffee in the lobby. I drove across town to the IHOP on Lincoln Highway, and I ordered the senior breakfast. 2 eggs, 2 pancakes, 2 strips of bacon, and I ate every bite of it. The waitress, a heavy-set woman with a kind face, called me hone and refilled my coffee 3 times. I left her a 20 on a $9 check. Then I went to work. I drove to the credit union where I'd banked since 1976. They opened at 9 on Sundays for limited services. I waited in the parking lot until they unlocked the doors, and I was the first person in. I asked for the manager. The manager was a woman named Denise, who I'd known for 20 years, since back when she was a teller and her hair was still brown. She took me into her office and closed the door. I told her everything. I showed her the ledger. I showed her the credit card statements. I showed her the lease agreement on the BMW. I showed her the receipts I'd kept for 3 years in a manila envelope at the back of the desk. Denise looked at the ledger for a long time. Then she looked at the ledger for a long time. Then she looked at me. "Sir," she said, "why didn't you come in sooner?" I said I made a promise to my wife. She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. We started with the credit cards. I had 4 of them. 2 were Visas through the credit union. 1 was a MasterCard to a different bank, and 1 was a Discover I'd had since 1989. My son was an authorized user on 3 of them. His fiancée was an authorized user on 2. I had Denise call each company while I sat there, and one by one, we removed them. Every authorized user. Every single one. I had new cards reissued with new numbers. I set up fraud alerts. I set up notifications on my phone for every charge over $20. Then we went to the BMW. The lease was in my name. I'd co-signed, but the primary was mine, because my son's credit was bad, because of course it was. I called the dealership. The dealership said the lease had 4 months left. I said I wanted the car returned. They said the primary signer could request voluntary surrender. I said I was the primary signer and I was requesting voluntary surrender. They said someone would have to come pick it up. I said I would arrange that. Then I called my lawyer. His name was a man I'd known since I was 30, a friend of a friend who done my will and my wife's will and the closing on the house. He answered on the 3rd ring even though it was a Sunday. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "My friend, what would you like to do?" I said, "I want him out of my house." He said, "The house is in your name only?" I said, "Yes. My wife and I had it as joint tenants, but when she died it reverted to me alone. My son had no legal claim." He said, "Then we can serve him a notice to quit on Monday morning?" In Pennsylvania, since he's not on the lease and not paying rent, he's what we call a tenant at sufferance. We can give him a 30-day notice. If he refuses to leave, we go to the magistrate and we file for ejectment. I said, "Do it." He said, "You're sure?" I said, "I have never been more sure of anything." He said, "All right, I'll have it drawn up tonight. We'll serve him in the morning." I drove from the credit union to the storage facility on the south end of town. I rented a 10 by 15 unit. I paid for 6 months up front. Then I drove to the U-Haul place and reserved a small truck for Tuesday morning. I went back to the hotel. I took a long shower. I ate a sandwich from the gas station next door. I called my daughter in Tucson. She said, "Hello, Daddy." I said, "Sweetheart, I have to tell you something." I told her everything. I told her about the dog food. I told her about the banner. I told her about the credit cards. I told her about the lawyer. I told her about the storage unit. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Dad, I've been waiting 17 years for you to do this." I cried then. "I won't pretend I didn't." She said, "I'm flying out. I'm coming on Tuesday. Don't try to stop me. I already booked the ticket while you were talking." I said, "Your husband." She said, "My husband is fine for a few days. My oldest is 17 and can run the house. I'm coming." She came. She came on Tuesday morning and she rented her own car at the airport and she met me at the U-Haul place. She is 51 years old and she has her mother's face and her mother's spine. And when she saw me, she walked right into me and put her head on my shoulder the way she did when she was 8 years old and the dog had died. The lawyer had served the notice to quit on Monday at 9 a.m. My son had called me 46 times that day. His fiancée had called 11. I didn't answer any of them. On Tuesday at 10 a.m., my daughter and I and a sheriff's deputy drove to the house in the U-Haul. The deputy was a young man, late 20s, polite as a Sunday school teacher. He'd been briefed by the lawyer. He knew what we were doing. My son answered the door in sweatpants. He hadn't shaved. He looked like a man who had been awake all night. When he saw me, his face went through about 6 different expressions in 3 seconds. The last one was the one I'll remember. It was fear. I walked past him into my own house. His fiancée was on the couch in the living room, in one of my late wife's bathrobes, drinking coffee from one of the china cups. She stood up when she saw the deputy. She started to say something. The deputy held up his hand. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm here to inform you that the homeowner has rescinded your permission to occupy this premises. You have 30 days. However, the homeowner has also requested that you remove your personal belongings today, and we'd encourage you to do so peaceably." She looked at my son. My son looked at me. "Dad," he said. "Dad, come on." I didn't say anything. He said, "Dad, please. We were drunk. It was a joke. The dog food, it was a joke. We were going to bring out the real cake right after. You didn't even let us." I said, "Stop talking." He stopped. I said, "You will pack what is yours. You will not touch anything that was your mother's. My daughter will supervise. The deputy will stay until you're out. You have until 5 p.m. I went into the den. I closed the door. I sat in my father's chair and I waited. I could hear them packing. I could hear his fiancée crying at one point. I could hear my son arguing with my daughter about a TV. My daughter said that TV was Mom's. Dad bought it for her in 2015 for Christmas. You don't get to take it. My son said, "I bought stuff for this house too." My daughter said, "With whose money?" My son didn't answer. It took them 6 hours. They filled up the BMW and a Honda Civic that belonged to my son's fiancé's brother, who showed up around 2 p.m. and refused to look me in the eye. At 4:45 p.m., the deputy knocked on the den door. "Sir," he said, "they're done." I went out to the front porch. My son was standing by the BMW. His fiancée was already in the passenger seat. She was on her phone. Of course she was. My son looked at me. He had been crying. I won't pretend that didn't move something in me, because it did. He was my boy. I had taught him to ride a bicycle on the sidewalk in front of this house. I had carried him on my shoulders to the school bus on his first day of kindergarten. I had loved him before I knew how to love anything. He said, "Dad." I said, "What?" He said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I know." He said, "Please, please don't do this." I said, "It's already done, son. You did it. Not me. I just stopped letting you do it to me." He said, "What am I supposed to do?" And here is the thing I want you to understand. Because I have thought about this every day since, and I want it to be right when I tell it. I did not say what I felt. What I felt was, "I don't know, son. I don't know what you're supposed to do. I'm 72 years old and I don't know what I'm supposed to do half the time either." What I felt was the pull, the old pull, the one that had cost me everything for 17 years, the pull to open my arms and tell him it was all right and we'd figure it out together. But my wife, in my head, said no. My wife, in my head, said let him learn. So what I said was, "You're 43 years old. You'll figure it out. That's what adults do." He stood there for another minute. Then he got in the car and they drove away. The BMW got picked up by the dealership on Friday. The credit cards were closed by Wednesday. The lawyer filed paperwork on Monday the following week to recover the charges that were unauthorized, which under Pennsylvania law and the cardholder agreements amounted to about $18,000 I had a reasonable chance of getting back, though my lawyer warned me not to count on more than half. My daughter stayed for 10 days. We cleaned the house. We put my late wife's china back in the cabinet where it belonged. We threw out the bathrobe and bought new linens. We took down the banner. We ate dinner at the dining room table, just the two of us, and she told me stories about her kids and her husband, and I told her stories about her mother that she'd never heard, and we cried sometimes and laughed more. My son called me every day for 2 months. I didn't answer. Then he stopped calling. Then he called again 6 weeks later and left a voicemail saying he was in a program. He didn't say what kind. I didn't ask. I called him back and I said, "I'm glad." I said, "When you've been sober or clean or whatever you're working on for 1 year, you call me." We'll have coffee. He hung up on me. He called back 10 minutes later. He said, "Okay, Dad, 1 year. I'll call you in 1 year. I'll call you in 1 year." That was 13 months ago. He called me last week. We had coffee on Thursday at the diner on Lincoln Highway, the one near the IHOP. He'd lost weight. He looked older. He was working as a delivery driver for a parts warehouse and living in a one-bedroom apartment over a laundromat in West York. The fiancée was gone. She'd left him about 6 weeks after they moved out when she realized he didn't have a rich father anymore. He apologized again. I let him. I didn't say it was all right because it wasn't. But I told him I loved him because I do. And I told him I hoped he'd keep going because I do. And I told him that I would see him again in another 6 months and we'd see how things were. He cried in the diner. I didn't. I'm going to tell you the lesson because I know that's what you came for. Here it is, for whatever it's worth, from a 73-year-old man in a cardigan. If you are a parent and your child is taking from you and you are letting them because you love them or because you promised someone you would or because you don't know how to stop, you have to stop anyway. Love that costs you your dignity is not love, it's a tax. And the people you're paying it to don't respect you for paying it. They despise you for it. They have to, otherwise they'd have to look at themselves. Stopping doesn't mean you don't love them. It means you love them enough to let them be men and women instead of children grown old on your money. My wife knew that. I think she always knew that. I think when she made me promise to take care of our son, she didn't mean what I thought she meant. I think she meant take care of him by making him take care of him, by making him take care of himself. I just couldn't hear it then. I heard it the night he handed me that bowl. I keep the bowl, by the way. I washed it and I put it on a shelf in the den, next to the photograph of my wife. Some mornings I look at it and I remember. Most mornings I don't. The house is quiet now. The radiator still clanks. The leaves still come down off the oak. I sit on the back porch in my father's chair and I drink my coffee and I think about my wife, and I think about my son, and I think about the long road between the man I was a year ago and the man I am now. It wasn't revenge. I want that to be clear. It wasn't revenge. I want that to be clear. It wasn't revenge. It was just, finally, after too many years, the truth. And the truth, it turns out, is the only thing that ever set me free. I've thought a lot, in the months since that birthday dinner, about how a man arrives at a moment like the one I lived through. Nobody hands you a bowl of dog food on a Tuesday afternoon for no reason. There's a long road that leads to it, and most of the road is paved by the man holding the bowl. But some of it, I've had to admit, was paved by me. I gave my son everything I had, and I called it love. But love, the real kind, the kind my late wife had for both of us, doesn't strip a person of their ability to stand on their own feet. What I did for 17 years wasn't love. It was fear dressed up as devotion. I was afraid of losing him the way I'd lost his mother, and so I bought him, year after year, with money and silence and excuses I made to myself in the dark. And the more I bought him, the less of him there was to keep. A man learns hard things late sometimes. I learned that a promise made in grief is not a contract. My wife asked me to take care of our son, and I twisted that into something she never meant. Taking care of a grown man does not mean paying his way. It means telling him the truth, even when it costs you. It means letting him fall so he can learn to stand. The kindest thing I could have done for my boy when he was 31 and broke and bitter would have been to shut the door and tell him to figure it out. I didn't do it, and he punished me for not doing it, the way the weak always punish the people who let them stay weak. There's a reason the bowl of dog food came to my table that night, and the reason was me. I taught him every day for 17 years that there was nothing he could do to me that I would not absorb. So eventually he tested it. That's what people do. They keep pushing until they find the wall. And if there is no wall, they walk right through you and out the other side. And then they hate you for not having stopped them. Strength, I've come to believe, isn't loud. It isn't a man shouting at his children or pounding the table. Strength is the quiet decision, made in a hotel room at midnight on your 72nd birthday, that the person you've been is finished and the person you're going to be starts in the morning. Strength is the phone call to the credit union. Strength is the locksmith. Strength is letting your son cry in the driveway and not going to him. I have my dignity back now. I have my house, my coffee in the morning, my chair on the back porch, and a daughter who came when I needed her. I have less than I had a year ago in dollars, and I have more than I've had in 2 decades, in everything that counts. The lesson, if there is one, is this. Nobody can take your life away from you while you're still inside it, but you can give it away yourself, slowly, year by year, and call it love. Don't